historically, I usually do introductions of everyone. I think kind of in order to preserve time today, I probably won't do that, except for just ask the members of the committee to introduce themselves. Right. So I'm Wim Matthews, the CAFO program manager. We are recording too, just to let everybody know the way we keep the minutes of these meetings. Right. We record the whole thing from start to finish. So when we're done, right, if you ever want to go back and listen to part of the meeting, you can just pull up that digital recording and find the section and listen to it there. Christy Caldwell with ODA and Amanda Sweeney with ODA. And then Tom, you want to take it away for?
Tom Thompson, Northwest Ag Consulting.
And what seat do you hold?
Ag, AG, not EGG.
Yes.
And what did you say?
What seat on the committee do you hold?
Public, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm Buddy Muir with Biosphere Enhancement LLC.
Perfect. Anybody on the phone with the committee? Jennifer, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hello, Jennifer Cruikshank. I'm with OSU Extension.
Last call for committee members. Raise your digital hand. All right. So I guess for folks online, right, let's introduce the folks in the room because everybody online can see in the chat, right, who's all there. Would you like to introduce yourself?
My name is Candace. I'm Christine Anderson. I'm a farmer in Oregon. Hi, my name is Sarah King. I'm also a farmer here in Oregon.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. So item number 2, right, is the review of the meeting minutes from last year. This committee meets 3 times a year. And again, the minutes are all kept digitally and that digital audio file. Does anybody that was here at the October meeting, right, have any changes or updates to the minutes from the last 2022 meeting? All right, not hearing any, we'll go ahead and just file those minutes as approved. Again, they're posted, usually get posted about a week or 10 days after the meeting's over with. So if anybody wants to take a look, you can go back and do that. And then we'll have some people joining us both in the room and online to give presentations along the way. The first presentation item is that 141, which is 145, which is small and raw milk dairy outreach program. And so there'll be a PowerPoint to look at that.
Windows always ask you to get it to.
There we go.
All right, can somebody give us an idea on the Teams meeting, right? Can you see the presentation?
I can't see it yet, Wim. I just still see the room.
All right, thanks, Isaac. We're working on it here.
How do you share it on Teams?
So there's a button on the top of the actual meeting one.
Share content.
Sure.
Yeah.
It says that I have to update the driver.
Not now. Share right there.
Yeah, no, it's just gonna make that.
Get it updated, huh?
Yeah. When can you share it from your computer? I'll see if.
You know, 'cause I'm not on the meeting.
Give me a second.
We're still loaded up. Sorry for the technical delay, folks. We're gonna get this figured out here.
40 years ago, I remember sitting waiting for stuff to do and they haven't finished anything. They made it better though, but.
That's why we still use, you know, we still have pencils and pencil sharpeners, right? Because they never go out of style.
Yeah.
Doesn't take a battery.
It'll work.
Pocket knife helps out if you need it.
Can you see that now?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
You switch to
It's just-
slideshow.
Button.
Jump to top.
Yep.
Yeah, we're at the top slideshow right up there.
Oh.
There you go. Play from the start. All right, Isaac, how's that look now? Full screen view?
Looks great.
All right, finally, thank you. All right, so today we wanted to talk about a program that ODA is launching this year, calendar year 2023, called Program Outreach to Small and Raw Milk Dairies. Next slide. So, oh, wait till it switches over. There we go. So what's going on? So there, ODA's had a permit program for 35 years for confined animal feeding operations. And every dairy in the state that has a grade A milk license, right, issued by ODA has a CAFO permit. So historically, the way dairies have come into the permit world is they've come to get a grade A license, right? And then interagency coordination brings them forward our program. Because the CAFO program, the state definition of CAFO, right, was developed in the 80s. It essentially to permit dairies, right? That was the reason that state stuff was all put together. So over the years, right, we've received concerns by the dairy industry that has permits that, hey, there's other facilities out there operating that don't have permits. And that's the concern about level playing field. And not having a permit once one's required is there could be negative environmental and public health impacts, right, from the waste system operation. Or lack of a waste system creates the unlevel playing field, right? That's an economic unlevel playing field. And then violate state law. State law, like I say, has been around for a long, long time that said these facilities with these characteristics need permits. I'll go ahead and I just pasted state law verbatim into the slide here. Let's go through it. Once the concerns came to us, right, we did a quick internet search to figure out, well, how, because we don't have any way to know, right, how many facilities that do raw milk or small dairies, without permits are out there. And so we searched on the internet on Craigslist, right, and we looked at Portland, like the Portland metro area, Salem, Eugene, and I think Ashland on the same day, right? And we didn't write people's names and phone numbers down, right, or Craigslist stuff down. We just counted them. So I'm not sure if, somebody advertised in Ashland could also advertise in Eugene, be the same facility. But that's where we came up with that number of 100 was just a brief survey to try to figure out, what did we see that was out there in the universe. All right, next slide. So when this comes up, this is going to be this is the definition of a CAFO in state law, right? So CAFOs are defined, or they were originally defined in federal law. And the state developed a state definition that includes every facility that is defined as a federal facility. And these other ones that are defined in state law. right? Oregon currently permits way more dairies, right? Way more facilities of all kinds than the federal law requires, because there is a state law that says a confined animal feeding operation is defined in rural, and it is concentrated, confined, feeding or holding of animals or poultry, including but not limited to horses, cattle, sheep, swine, feeding areas, dairy confinement areas, slaughterhouse or shipping terminal holding pens, poultry and egg production facilities, and fur farms. So it's pretty specific that it talks about dairies there. And then it describes, okay, what are the characteristics, right, that require the permit? And the most important word in those first two bullets are the word or. Right? So the first thing it says, you're confining them, right? You're concentrating them or confining. And the reason they put those, it's a little confusing. The reason those two words are up there is confined is a state term. Concentrated is the federal term. And the very last bullet, B, any animal feeding operation subject to regulation as a concentrated, which is a federal facility. Well, our belief is none of these small dairies or raw milk dairies are federal facilities, right? They only trigger the state level of look. So if you confine in buildings or pens where the surface has been prepared with concrete, rock, or fibrous material to support the animals in wet weather, or you have a wastewater treatment works, right? It's not and all these three, it's or. Any one of those three create a permit requirement. You have a wastewater treatment works, or you're discharging waste into waters of the state. And waters of the state is a broad definition that says it's all surface and groundwaters. Kind of, the colloquial definition, like short of a mud puddle, right, on the, the driveway. A road ditch with water in it is waters of the state of Oregon, right? A county or a driveway road ditch, right? It doesn't have to have nexus to waters of the U.S. It's because there's this unique definition that's waters of the state of Oregon.
The question, is there a time frame? Is it 1 day then to meet that spec?
On the confinement?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in the federal definition, right, when they talk about confinement, like on a dairy, they said when you bring the animal in, regardless of species, to milk it, that's a day of confinement. A day does not mean it has to be in the milking parlor or in the barn for 24 hours, right? So they could be out in pasture for 22 hours a day and they're in the parlor an hour twice a day. When they come into the parlor, come into the barn, that's a day of confinement. In that 20, so they're in and out 15 times during a 24-hour day, maybe, it's still, that's 1 day of confinement. Right. Next slide. So, our belief is a CAFO definition include raw milk and small dairies. And I'd also mention that there are thousands of operations in Oregon that meet the state's definition of a CAFO, right, that we don't permit. An example is 3 chickens in the backyard, right? Every night those chickens are in a chicken coop. That's the confinement, right? Do they have a wastewater treatment works? No, because the chicken litter is handled in a dry form, right? They're not washing bottles, they're not washing the milking machine. Dry manure, confinement, yes. Dry manure, no. Or I'm sorry, liquid manure, no. Dry manure, yes. Discharge, hopefully, no. On those facilities, we say, no, you don't need a permit, right, until you get to 37,000 chickens. So that many chickens with a dry system, because of the size, now you need a permit. But if you remember back to the first slide, right, there's no numbers on there. It doesn't say you got to have 50 cows. It's assumed to say 1 or more animals with the system that has these characteristics. All dairies have a milking system, right, and that creates the wastewater treatment works. You have to wash the milking system. If you're bottling milk, if you're making cheese or yogurt, if you're further processing, any of those systems create wastewater, right? Because you have to clean them one way or the other, and that then creates a need for some kind of a system, right? And again, the system definition does not define a size. Where say a system is anything more than 500 gallons or 500 gallons per day. It just says a wastewater treatment works is it's a whole list of things. So based on the fact that dairies, right, regardless of size or use of the product, milk the animals, right? And even if they're seasonal milking, right, they're milking some time of the year. confining the animals when they milk, unless you're out in the pasture on a stool with a bucket, right? They're in a facility, right, being milked, and the milking machine needs to be washed out. On our permitted dairies that we currently have, and I'll give some numbers later so you can get an idea about how many we currently permit. Our current permitted dairies, several of them have processing plants attached to the dairy permit, right? Where they do yogurt, butter, milk in bottles, plastic and glass. And they do cheese. And so that the processing waste, processed wastewater from all those processes are also, considered processed wastewater and can all be handled in the same, in the same permit. And then I said it earlier, but I'll just repeat again, right? All Oregon dairies with a grade A food milk producer license have a CAFO permit with us. And today that's 233 facilities statewide. All right, next slide. So the next one just talks a little bit about history, and I'm not going to read everything in there. Just talk to you about before I started working here, right? What I was told is that the CAFO program was initiated, to provide environmental permits for dairies. Since then, it's been expanded, right? And we permit pretty much every species of animal now that meets size thresholds or operational characteristics, right? Wildlife Safari has a CAFO permit with us. Our smallest dairy permit, I think, is 7 cows right now. Our largest is 38,000 cows. So there's a huge diversity of range, right? And the 38,000 cow system doesn't look anything like the 7 cow system. ODA and DEQ cooperate on this program, right? Both of the agencies write the permit jointly. ODA doesn't issue this permit solely by ourselves, right? It's joint with DEQ. We have a memorandum with DEQ about how we're going to operate, right? Roles and responsibilities for each agency. We issue 2 types of permits. One is the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. That's the federal permit. If you are a concentrated animal feeding operation, you need a federal permit. Again, we think these smaller facilities, right, are state facilities that need a water pollution control facilities, which is a state permit. We currently, right now, today, we have 501 permitted facilities statewide, right? That's beef feedlots, that's poultry facilities, eggs and meat birds, dairies of all sizes, fur farms, swine operations, meat goat operations, dairy goat operations, dairy sheep. We just permitted a sheep dairy here a couple weeks ago. 233 of those 501 are dairies, and 75 of those 233 are small facilities, right? Less than 200 milking and dry cows. So that's a third of our total dairy permit number, right? Are currently existing, our small facilities. All right, we'll move on to the next one. So in order to roll this out, right? So our goal is, right, to roll out this education program for a year, for 12 months. So calendar year 2023, we want to roll this out, make presentations to whoever would like to have one, talk to individuals, groups, who's ever's out there, right, to have this conversation. We're not finding anybody this year, right? We're not putting people out of business this year. We're just rolling this out to have a conversation about facilities that are out there, right? And do they need coverage, right? And if they do, how to get it. I would tell you that Washington State has a little different regulatory system, right, for permitting, environmental permitting and food safety permitting. I checked with them this morning, right? They require all of the raw milk dairies in Washington to have, it's called the Dairy Nutrient Management Act. It's not a permit, right? It's a plan, is what they call it. But their facilities are all regulated. They have an environmental permit and they have a food safety permit, right? The other thing I think I need to be clear here, this permit is environmental only, right? This does not, we don't measure milk for bacteria counts. We don't test milk for any constituent in milk. This is all about the environmental impact of the facility itself and to make sure that there's not discharge, right? That manure gets land applied agronomically so it grows grass in the pasture, and that wash water that you collect when you're doing operations, right, gets put out, not in the middle of the winter where it ends up in the stream kind of thing. And so one of the ways that we want to roll this out, which is something we've done since I've been here for over 20 years, is we offer educational reviews, right? And so when invited, we would go out and take a look at facilities and see what's, ask the questions about, well, how do you, show me how you operate and where all the facility is here. And then we can help with evaluation. It's typically initiated by the operator. There's no fee for it. We view this, the best thing for us is to view the site. I mean, we've done stuff over the phone. It's just not as valuable as actually looking at the site. To look at existing facilities or envision proposed facilities. And then evaluate, right? There's two big pieces of this permit, right? One is management activities and the other is structural, right? And again, a very small dairy, they have minimal structure, but have a massive amount of management, right? A large dairy may have a massive amount of infrastructure. Well, we can also, right, if a permit's needed, if we say, hey, we think a permit's required here, we can assist with the application process. And then we can also assist folks connecting with technical and financial assistance, right? Because there's several programs, federal and state, that will provide assistance with writing a nutrient management plan, funding for installing facility, soil testing, nutrient management plan development. What else do they do, Tom?
Whatever help you need.
Yeah, exactly. And so those are through the soil water conservation districts, NRCS, watershed councils potentially, and they're private consultants, right, that do the work. Those federal and state, assistance, there's usually not a cost for the assistance part. On the consulting, right, there's going to be a cost for that. All right, next one.
Is there a time frame involved in this? By a certain date, they'll have to have these or what? No.
So our plan right now is to roll this out for a year, for this calendar year, right? And we're not going to go down the road and knock on doors. We're asking people to come to us and ask if we can go out and make presentations and have conversations. And then we'll have to evaluate at the end of the year, right? What do we do in 24? Okay. So the next slide, when it comes up, is a permit waiver, right? So there is an opportunity for permit waiver, and we developed this several years ago when DEQ came to us and said, process wastewater or land application needs a permit, right, regardless of the amount of wastewater. And we've got these facilities that are growing, they have chickens and their product is eggs, and they wash the eggs, right? They've got 100 hens and they're washing the eggs, right? And it's some wastewater, but it's not a lot. And so we looked at that and said, under the state permit, we could develop a waiver, and we did. And so what we did is, so we asked them to give us on a form, right? Tell us how you operate. But we'd like to go out and take a look at the facility, right? And then you look at the land or look at the soil types and what they're doing. And we've been able to issue waivers on egg wash facilities, right? Some of the egg wash facilities have required permits because they're saying we're washing eggs from 2,500 hens year round, and we live in Tillamook, right? It's just the weather's not going to be conducive in December, January to land apply that stuff. And so without some storage, without some planning, it could be an issue. How come you're not moving forward on, there you go. Oh, you're still not there.
I had it.
So in the waiver, for small raw milk, right, the waiver is an option. And we've got it described currently as single family based areas where all products are consumed on site. And our belief is typically these facilities like this aren't going to have a large number of animals, one or two, possibly three animals, depending on species, right? This is not species specific, right? If you have goats, right, you might have 7 or 8 goats, and it's not a lot of volume. And then consuming on site, right? So that's you and grandma across the street, right? That's consumption on site. If milk's being bottled and loaded up and hauled up and down the road, or people are coming into the dairy, taking it away from the dairy to consume, then I don't think a waiver is going to work there. We don't have any concern about income, right? There's no income questions that we ask about this, and there's no financial data that we need. Right, so we wanted to make this test as simple as possible. Consumed on site, let's talk about a waiver. Not consumed on site, we'll talk about a permit. We'd like people to apply so we can consider the waiver. We do a site visit, confirm there's no discharge. And that the system's, functional enough that it's not gonna, operated reasonably right, it's not gonna cause a problem. We wouldn't charge a fee for it, and we give them a letter saying they don't need a permit. So that's what a waiver looks like. If a permit is necessary, right, there's a process and there's a fee. So you need an application form. All our application stuff's online right now. A land use compatibility statement. So this is the other interesting thing. We can't issue a permit to anybody until the local land use authority says that facility is allowed to exist there. So if the land use is rural residential and ag's not allowed, right, that we can't permit that facility there because it's not allowed in the zone. Right, a dairy in an EFU zone is 100% approved. It's an outright allowed activity. So EFU is is an automatic. But other zones, right, the land use has to say that the authority has to say it's okay. Nutrient management plan. So everybody has a nutrient management plan. It might be a scary term, but everybody has one, regardless of size. Because if we ask the questions about, well, what do you do when you wash the milking machine out? They could tell you, I do this, this, and this. So the nutrient management plan is putting a narrative together of what that is, and then putting some numbers to it about, well, yeah, I clean everything into a bucket and I take it outside and I throw it, in the garden. And well, how many square feet is a garden, right? What's the soil type? And what's the load? What does the hydraulic load look like in the wet weather? To make sure that the appearance, right, is there's not discharge. All the forms are online. We can assist, right, with filling that out if we get to that point. And then if people need technical help, right, writing a plan or other things, there's that available too.
So one clarification, if they need a permit, they'll come in under the small, assuming they have the proper amount of animals. Okay.
Yeah. So on dairy for cows, right? So sheep and goats, currently we permit sheep, goat, and cow dairies, right, on the food safety side. And for cows, right, a small facility is 200, less than 200 milking and dry cows. Sheep, the numbers are going to be larger. Goats, we use goats, the same number as sheep, and that'll be several hundred animals there. But our belief is, right, most of these are small facilities. We'll review the application, right? If we get one, review it. I believe these are all going to be small. I'm not sure anybody being medium, right? But smalls and medium facilities, right, don't require public notice. And so it's going on a state permit, doesn't trigger a public notice requirement. Once we get a complete application, right, we can issue a permit. It's a pretty linear process. The sheep dairy that we permitted here last month, it was 30 days from start to finish, right? They called and said, hey, we're pursuing a grade A license for the sheep dairy. How long it takes to get a permit? And we said, well, it's mainly dependent on you, how quick you can come to us with that stuff. That was start to finish 30 days. It's not years, it's not months, as long as we can get a complete application. If it's a big facility right now, I don't anticipate that this group of facilities would be big. If it is large, right, every large facility, brand new, has to go to public notice, 35 days with a hearing. I just don't anticipate these facilities being that size. If we do have that right, we have to respond to comments and then make a decision on the permit. Next one. So this is a little bit about, so how do CAFOs maintain compliance, right? The permitted ones we have right now, what do they do to maintain compliance? The permit's a little bit on the scary side because it says zero. I can't discharge anything. Applying manure and wastewater agronomically is not discharge. If you apply manure and wastewater agronomically and a black thunderhead cloud parks on your field, rains like crazy, and there's runoff, that's not a permit violation. And actually the permit protects you under Clean Water Act there because you had a plan, right, that you did everything humanly possible to do it right, and you can't control the weather. So there actually is protection from discharge there. You know, we can't, the things we're looking at are bacteria, nutrients, and sediment to surface and groundwaters in the state. And that limit is the same for all facilities regardless of what size the facility is. So that the limits don't change based on size. So everybody has to drive the same speed limit. They all drive a different car. Their nutrient management plan, no two are the same, right? They all have that same speed limit. And the way that CAFOs maintain compliance, right, is they implement structural components. And again, those are going to be very different for each facility. And the structural component may be a wheelbarrow, a bucket, and a pitchfork versus a 1,000,000 gallon this and an 8,000,000 gallon that, and a 300 horsepower tractor, right? There's no requirement in this program that says everybody has to have this at a minimum. It just says you have to have a system. And it says you have to have, once you have a structural system, then you have to have a commensurate management system, right, to operate it. Because if you have the most ideally designed system, right, if you let it fill up and run over, it's not going to protect water. So how do we make it not run over? Well, there's a gauge there, right? And we require the gauge be looked at monthly. So when it gets full, they make plans to do export, apply, you know, stop putting stuff in. All right, next one. So again, any type and size of permit they all require the same thing, right? But how each individual permittee responds to that is uniquely different. Almost, well, every area we has a land application activity listed in their nutrient management plan. As compared to poultry, where poultry broiler facilities, most of those large facilities, they don't farm, right? They export all the litter they generate to a fertilizer manufacturing company or other farmers that do farm. Almost every dairy, well, actually every dairy that we have has a land application activity. And if they didn't have enough land to utilize the nutrients they generate, right, they could export the excess, right, to a neighbor, and that's fine under the plan. But you have to figure out, there's got to be a balance in there about the nutrients generated, right? We got to use those up, match that with uptake through cropping. Probably won't spend a lot of time on these structural components, but it's just manure and wastewater storage, land application activities, right? You know, do you have a tractor and a manure spreader? Do you have an irrigation system where you pump stuff through a main line and a big gun or a pivot, however you get it there? Quality management's included in this. And you can't just charge from feed storage, from animal housing, from the processing area. There can't be pipes right out of there directly to a river or even directly to a field, right? Because that's not an agronomic application if you just pipe it away. And management, where we see failure on facilities, it's almost always in management, right? Structural components fail once in a while, but 90% of the non-compliance is because a management component failed, right? The hired person didn't look at something and didn't do something. Somebody turned on a pump and didn't check to see if the hose was connected on the other end. They let the tank get too full and it ran over. They applied manure too close to the stream and it rained really hard. So we ensure the permit requirements are being followed by conducting inspections, right? So we look at data, the nutrient management plan, and then data that they keep on the farm. And then we inspect once every 10 months. And that's a walkthrough of the facility and a look at the records while we're on the farm. These permits don't require reporting to us, right? You don't have to regurgitate the data a second time back to us. The federal permits do require a big report. State permits do not. And so we inspect. We do complaints. If somebody calls and say, hey, the neighbors over there are doing this, and it may be a water quality violation, we would inspect to check. The permit is not a permit for nuisance, right? And public health and welfare things, right? Other than the environmental things through water, right? So a dairy is going to have, manure is going to smell. It's going to smell. Land application that's allowed and right to farm protects you as long as you're a legal activity. Another benefit of the permit, right? We actually had a call from Lane County, right? Hey, there's a goat facility here, and can you tell me if they're permitted? I said, well, they're not. They said, well, are they protected under right to farm for their land application manure? And they're not, because they're not legal. Right, that activity is not legal in that zone, and so right to farm goes out the window. And the county said, well, you're gonna have to get a permit. We do enforcement when we get to that point, you know, it's progressive activity. Usually the first level is a conversation with the permittee. Follow-up levels are a water quality advisory, which we don't term compliance, right? It's a warning letter type thing. A notice of violation is you did violate some part of your permit, and we're telling you what part it is and giving you a written correction activity. And then a penalty is the, you know, ultimate. Just because we write a notice, that doesn't mean you get fined. And we can't find a facility without first giving them a notice. And then ultimately, the ultimate thing is we would revoke their permit. And we've done that in the state. And we coordinate with a bunch of partner agencies too. I talked about the enforcement steps, that spells it out a little bit. I'll just skip that one. Permit statistics. So the 10-month routine inspection, we might go to a facility more than one time in 10 months for multiple reasons. Sometimes they ask us to come out to take a look at something. Sometimes if we come out on our routine inspection and find a problem, we might schedule a follow-up to go back in 2 weeks. Just say, hey, can you put a Band-Aid on that, right? Because it's leaking. And we'll come out to confirm that it got done. Or I'm gonna have an engineer come and look at this, right? And they're gonna tell me what they think I should do, right? Can we come back and figure that out in 2 weeks? But on that 10-month routine, right, 97% of those last year were in compliance. So, and that's the compliance is how the facilities operate, right? And they have in this state, they have a really high compliance rate. People do a really good job with that. And then like our number one priority about getting to the field, right, is if we get a complaint on a permit facility, that's you're out the door trying to be there that day. So that's our number one thing. So here's kind of the list of what our plans are, right? To do this outreach for 12-month period for calendar year 23. We want to work with you know, our other programs within our agency, right, as well as traditional CAFO program partners to learn about small and raw milk dairy outreach. We'll provide presentations when invited. We were at the Small Farms Conference and had some interest. Went out and did some soil tests on 2 or 3 places based on that activity, and got 1 permit application, I think, because of that activity. There's no penalty, right? We are not proposing penalties for anybody during the outreach period, right? And even when we started permitting things other than dairy in the early 2000s, there was a phase-in period, right? You know, so for large poultry facilities, they had 12 months to come through the door. And we didn't start with a penalty saying, hey, you're operating without a permit. We just said, yes, you need a permit for this activity. How can you get one? If somebody wants to do an education review or qualify for a waiver, we do those for no fees. And we can help, like say, if the facility needs a permit and they want to apply, we can help with that. And again, there's a group of technical service providers, right, that can provide different activities out there. So that's pretty much the overview. Open the floor to questions, and I think if you'll indulge me a minute, like let me ask the room first, right? If we have questions, and then we can go to the folks on the teams. Questions in the room?
I guess my question is, why did you decide on such a short education period? To me, it seems really short to only have 1 calendar year. We're already in Q2. Yeah, what's the background there?
Sure. So our thought on that, and so when we put this together, right, we rolled it out to our traditional partners, right, to say, what do you think is reasonable? And the reason we came up with that amount of time was everybody felt that the requirement didn't change, right? The requirement's been there forever. And that we did have raw milk dairies that had come through the door and gotten permitted, right? And so it's not the fact that we were, I think we would have provided a longer window, a glide path window, right? If this would have been brand new, that had never, it was a brand new expectation, a brand new rulemaking, or brand new law. But because we felt it wasn't either of those things, it was existing, and that folks, should have been aware of it. That was the reason for that. I mean, I guess we entertain comments, right, on, a longer period would be helpful because of X, Y, and Z.
Can I ask another question? I'm sorry. And were there any like current raw milk producers involved in the development of this program?
So I'd say no, yeah. Are the ones we permitted, right now? But we do, there are, I believe, 3, right, of that 233 group, right, that are raw milk. And some of them came into the program as traditional grade A licensed producers, right, and then transitioned over time. Right, so they knew about the permit because they were already there before they changed their end product system, yeah.
Are you looking to develop a program for other species that's defined under the administrative rule that outlines the confined feeding and CAFO definition programs? I'm thinking about horse facilities in particular.
So I'd say at this point, no. So we do have a handful of horse facilities permitted. Horses are a little bit different, right? Because there's a huge number difference in horses, right? So horses are like the backyard chicken example. Horses are dry manure systems, right? We don't have horse facilities with liquid manure systems. And so now you're talking about 150 horses, right, to trigger a permit. And because those facilities are of a size that either county planning has brought those to us, we've got 6 or 7, right? Between 150 and 1,200, we've got 1,200 head horse facility, right? And so those bigger ones, because they're dry manure systems, not discharging, they're at a different, we believe a different threshold. Wildlife Safari has a CAFO permit, right? Because certain animals that they have a liquid waste system, and when we inspected them the first time, right, they were discharging, and they've changed that. I mean, we definitely would consider developing if there was a group that came forward and said, hey, what, and we'd be happy to present things that, when we go out to the field, our staff does, if there's a way of, if the facility can make one change and not need a permit, we will help you make that change. Right, we're not out to try to build permit numbers, and there are some people where we've come up upon a horse facility, right, that had a wash rack, and then we're discharging the horse wash rack water, right? And so, is there any way you can do something different so you don't need a permit? And they figured out a way to do something different, and we said, fine, that's not, you can get out from underneath the permit. One thing you can't do, and it's confusing because DEQ used to allow this in 2016, they changed the rules. Facilities cannot dump this stuff into a septic system, right? 2016 and before, public health departments allowed that. 2016, DEQ changed the rules, right? We started permitting dog kennels in 2016 because a lot of their waste went to a septic system, and the health department approved it, and it was fine. And so the dog kennel rule says if you have an approved septic system and you don't change the size of your kennel and your system functions, you're good. If you expand or your system fails, then you have to come to CAFO. And so there's a creamery up in Forest Grove area, right? And when they built right before 2016, right, they've got a county approved septic for their processing system and everything. And we're fine with that. We don't require a permit there because all their wastewater goes into that system legally. The other thing that would still be legal today would be the city sewer, right? If you were hooked to city sewer, and that's the waste system, right? We don't need to permit it. It's already permitted. So again, without knowing the specifics, right, of the site and the facility, there may be ways to say, oh, no, you don't because of this. No worries.
So with this new program, if I'm understanding correctly, there could be a situation where someone was only milking, they had one cow and they were milking and they were, operating legally under the license exemption for raw milk and like doing stuff by the book in terms of sales. And they have one cow and they would be required to have a CAFO permit.
So I guess I want to make sure that we separate, right? So the raw milk rules are for on the health side, right? So the number of cows, 2 cows, no more than 3, no more than 2 lactating, right?
It impacts the structure of the business and how many.
Sure, right, absolutely. So using the example of 1 cow and the product is not being consumed on site, all the product is not, we would say, yes, we want to talk about a permit.
Can you tell me when you talk about liquid waste? Is there a definition of that from a liquid percentage quantity? Like how is that determined?
Sure.
I have a horse that is very liquidy, so I'm concerned that his manure and my cow's manure are going to be mislabeled.
Sure. So the way we define it in the permit is you have to have a tank, a pump, or a pipe to handle that stuff.
And if you don't need, if there's not.
So if you can use a pitchfork, and even though it's kind of runny, you can still pick it up. Right? You don't put it in a tank and pump it somewhere.
And because it's not needed, you can pick it up with a pitchfork.
Right. That's the other way to look at it is, urine versus feces. Right? Urine's going to be liquid, feces are going to be solid. Right. And a lot of this, chickens mix it all together internally.
Right.
If a cow pees on feces that they deposited first, right, that doesn't make it, liquid manure necessarily. But it kind of depends on, so we focus more on the system really rather than trying to come up with a percentage of solids, because then you would have to test to confirm.
Yeah.
And this is easier just to describe what the system is. Well, what's your system? It's a wheelbarrow, it's a pitchfork, I bed with straw and shavings. I pitch it into the wheelbarrow, I wheel it out, I dump it on this in my compost facility, right, in my manure storage building, whatever. And when spring comes, my neighbor comes to the tractor and hauls it away. Right, that's all solid.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So in terms of, my understanding of the Oregon raw milk exemption is that we're talking about 2 cows. So I'm assuming that most of these dairies that you've identified are within that limit of 2 cows. But we're talking about the CAFO program being an environmental factor, but there's an exemption for people with 2 cows that where the product doesn't leave the site. So I'm unclear on it seems like commerce is the defining line versus environmental impact. Can you speak more on that?
Sure. So at least in my view, right, the only place commerce came into this was in the initial questions that we were asked, right? Why don't these facilities have permits? Because they're in competition with us, right? And so we're in this market, we're required to have this environmental permit. These facilities don't seem to have these permits. That was the way the question was posed to us. And it wasn't, about, it wasn't about the amount of sales, right? It was just the fact there was commerce here. And so the raw milk exemption from the food safety side, that's where those number of animals came in, right? And we really have to kind of separate that, because it really doesn't have anything to do with the environmental side. Right, this is just talking about a permit to make sure the facilities operate environmentally correctly. All right, thank you for being patient, folks, on the meeting. Anybody with questions there? I'd also say, if you think of questions right later, send us an email.
Are questions the same as comments?
Well, again, so I want to be clear, right? This isn't a rulemaking. The agency's not changing any rules, creating new rules, anything like that. We have a public comment period, right? And people can provide comments. So I guess I would say that this is kind of a questions about the presentation, but anything I can clarify for you, I'll try.
I do have one question then. Is there a basis, and I think there was just a question about this, but is there an environmental basis for distinguishing between those that are selling offsite and those that are not?
No, not that I'm aware of now.
And so it's just a matter of one side is in, certain producers are theoretically in competition with others. And so in order to account for that, the state is considering requiring those quote unquote competitive actors to get a CAFO permit.
No, I mean, the way I describe it is that every dairy in Oregon requires a CAFO permit, right? Again, we don't get into the financial dealings, the marketplace, what type of product it is, right? Our state law says if you operate a facility with these characteristics, you need a permit. The
But
way the
again,
question, the question came to us was, why don't we believe some of these facilities are operating, right? They have characteristics that require a permit, right? And they don't have a permit. It wasn't that they're making more money than we are, right? Or they're more profitable than we are. We don't consider any of that. It's state law says a dairy with a waste system needs a permit in Oregon.
Sure, I understand. And there's an exemption for that if you're only consuming on-site and not selling off-site.
Correct.
Okay,
Unless you have 5 cows.
that was my question.
Well, consuming, right? I mean, you could have 50 pigs,
Well, that's a good point. too.
right? And that's consuming on site.
That's a good point.
It did say human consumption on site.
So it's the use of the milk,
Right. Other questions from folks on the meeting? All right, not hearing any. Thank you for your patience on that with the technical difficulties and all. Again, if you think of stuff, you can reach out to us through email or phone, and I'll do my best to respond and answer questions.
Hi, excuse me, I have a question.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm a little confused, and I think many of these questions are sort of pointing at this point. Now, if you're consuming everything with your family on your own land, why would you invite the government into that family affair?
So there's another program here at ODA called the Ag Water Quality Program, right? So every agricultural activity in Oregon is regulated. And the way the state divides regulation is, are you regulated under a point source program, which requires a permit? That's the CAFO program. Or are you regulated as a non-point entity, right? And any other facility, a grass seed farmer, a beef cow rancher, a horse farmer, right? All those people are regulated by the Ag Water Quality Program. And we both use the exact same statute, 468B025, and it says you cannot discharge. Oh, one of the ODA can't, without seeing a facility determine, right, does it meet the requirements of a waiver? And that's why we're asking for the invitation, so that we can make that determination, give you the piece of paper, and then be gone. And we've not figured out a way to do that remotely, right? To confirm that that's what's going on.
Yeah, so I'm a woman. I'm not really a farmer. I don't consider myself having really any public, I don't really touch the public at all. And so I'm a woman, and say I have, a goat and a dog. I mean, so you're going to come and onto my private property and ask to take a look at my goat because I happen to milk it a couple months out of the year. I mean, that just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me.
Yeah, like I say, if anybody has ideas about how you can, the agency can confirm, right, what that operation, what its impact on the environment is, without a view,
But if they're not causing any environmental degradation that's noticeable to the neighbors or somebody else rowing a boat by, then chances are, if they didn't invite the government in and didn't cause any problems, then they'd be kind of a wash, right? Or not?
Yeah, so we're just really talking about, if my daily affairs as a woman who walks around my land and feeds my goat and, cleans up its manure, if it's not impinging on my neighbors, there's really not a reason for the government to be invited into how I feed my family. That sounds kind of like common sense to me. Is there anything that you're saying that goes against that?
Well, I would just say that, I mean, the limit of our evaluation right is the facility operating environmentally soundly, not how you feed the family, where you choose to feed them or how often you feed them, right? So we're just looking at this is a dairy operation defined in Oregon statute as one that needs a permit, and we need to find a way to make sure that it doesn't need one, if that's the case.
Yeah, I get it, but again, let's look at it with common sense. So I say I have a 5-acre plot of land and I invite my goat into my barn and milk it for 10 minutes a day. Just from a common sense perspective, is that going to negatively impact the environment? You mentioned a mud puddle. Say I don't have running water on my land. I don't have I really don't have any of those issues. I'm just a woman milking a goat for 10 minutes a day inside of my barn. I mean, I'm just like you say and you kind of get into the semantics of it. But is there like a common sense thing here that also applies?
Well, I mean, what our attorneys always focus on, right, is the plain reading of the law. And so that's what brought us to where we're at. It's not an opinion, right, from the agency. It's what the law says.
Well, yeah, attorneys are who, deal in the legal system, but I'm talking about my private property, and that includes my goat. So the legal system is for corporations. There's a little bit of a difference there. And you seem to be trying to like sit on the fence of both things.
Well, no, everybody has to drive the same speed limit, right? Regardless of your size, regardless of your business structure, right?
Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but that's a good example. If I'm driving a car on my private property, then the speed limit is what I make the speed limit as. Once I go onto a public road, that's different, of course, because there's other people's opinions and values and whatnot. But on my private property, I can drive my 4-wheeler around as fast as I want.
Right, but
Hey,
if you look
Wim,
at,
this is
sure, go ahead.
Wim, this is Isaac. So I was just gonna say, sorry, my name is Isaac Staple. I'm the program director for ODA. I think when you look at, hi, sorry, I'm on the phone and not there. When you look at the water quality program rules and statutes, those are laws. Those apply to all lands in Oregon, whether they're private or public, and are geared at protecting the environment from either, like Wim had explained, point source or non-point sources. So in your example, on your property, if you're managing your goats and what you're doing there and it's not impacting the environment, you are in compliance with the rules and statutes of the state. So likely there wouldn't be an issue. The government wouldn't, get into your business, so to speak. If there was allegations of a discharge, or we received a complaint, or someone said, hey, somebody is, handling all of their manure from their goat and they're, putting it by the creek and it's, leaching with runoff into the creek and causing problems, then the state would say, hey, let's have a conversation about what you're doing and how you can improve your practices. Generally, like Wim had explained earlier, we take an education approach first. Like that's our first step when we're talking to folks, to make sure that they understand what the laws are and how it applies to them, and then how to comply with them before we would take any type of enforcement action. That's not our goal. Our goal is just compliance. I don't know if that helps at all, but.
Yeah, sorry, I have barking dogs. Sorry about that. No, it does help. And, I ask my questions for educational purposes, because when I read through your paperwork that was distributed in January, I'm just really seeing where I fall into this. You know, it seems like quite a broad perspective that, you know, I would take my precious time and money and fill out, you know, one of your permits so that I could milk my goat for 10 minutes a day. And, you know, if you're going to get that broad, I think it's fair to bring up these questions about, you know, private property and just the common sense of it all. And I kind of feel like all of the questions that were brought up, even by those who have, you know, a raw dairy that they sell from, are sort of headed that way. We're talking about, you know, a facility that has 1,000 cows and needs huge holding tanks. And I love the environment too. I wouldn't want that runoff to go into our water. But if you have 2 cows and, you know, 20 acres of land, really, like, I don't see the issue. Most of the raw dairy people I know are really amazing stewards of the land. So, you know, I think you kind of hinted at that this came from a complaint from maybe bigger dairy corporations, like, hey, you're not enforcing this and we have to have it enforced, you know, whatever their motive for that was. And I'm just kind of like, I guess, trying to understand and willing to be educated on, you know, why all of the sudden is there an enforcement on something that seems to be working quite well.
Don't you think that if somebody wrote a letter explaining, like you said, I used the wheelbarrow and the pitchfork and this and that, and you read that letter and it seemed plausible and blah, 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 that, you know, 20 acres and whatever, that you wouldn't have to go there because on paper it looks good, or would you still want to inspect it in person?
On the egg wash waiver, right?
Or that?
Yeah, we developed a form. And so step one is we look at the results that we got on the form, right? The responses we got there. And then made the decision, did we need to do a look or not? Right?
Yeah, yeah, and actually, I like that idea of corresponding. You know, like if I could correspond with you and say, hey, I have a goat and 5 acres and a dog, and you know, I use a pitchfork to put the goat's manure in my garden, and I'm quite happy with that. I mean, that just seems like a reasonable thing, just like you're talking about the chicken thing. It wouldn't automatically, you know, give you a heads up, hey, I need you to walk onto my land and have me fill out a paperwork, pay $125, or I may face a fine. You know, that seems like a little bit different than I'd be happy to write a letter to you, just like I'm happy to talk to you now and ask some decent questions and get some great answers.
All right, yeah, thanks for that. So I just want to do a time check here because we're running quite a bit behind. I know we could shorten up some of these other, the report, right, really is just, it's online for you to take a look at. I don't want to get too far off track for the next few items though.
I'm sorry to interject. Yeah, I just had one last question, and I'll keep it very, very brief, but it's based on something that was mentioned a moment ago, and I'll save my, 2 minutes of comments for that period later on. But I guess the question is, and forgive me for not catching your last name, Isaac, but there was a discussion about essentially, look, if your operation, if the intensity of your operation isn't so great such that you're creating any sort of environmental issues for your neighbor, obviously this isn't a quote, but it sounded like what he was saying was essentially, we're probably just going to leave you alone and it won't be a big deal. And I just want to make sure that I'm understanding correctly I appreciate if this is the case, but my understanding is that's kind of a polite assurance. If there's anywhere in the statute or the regulation that is based on, I guess that's my question, is there anywhere in the statute or regulation that interpretation is coming from, or is that just an assurance that this body is making at this point?
So maybe, I'm not sure I totally understand your question. So when I was talking earlier and, referring referring to like whether we got a complaint or not or no complaint. Mostly referring to the water quality program that does non-point source, right? So like we're not going to come, the water quality program's not going to come to your house just to say, hey, what's your farming operation? What are you doing today? And like, let me see what you're doing. When we're talking about the CAFO permit and the regulations that they enforce, or the CAFO program, if you're meeting definitions of a CAFO, that's when we'd want to have the conversation. And again, like has been discussed, like there's not everyone that may meet that definition of confining animals and would need a permit. So it would just depend, like, oh yeah, no, you don't. It's going to be property or facility by facility specifics whether or not you would need the permit, which is what Wim's point is. Like, it's hard for us to know how to answer that question and how to work with an operator if we don't actually know specifics of what they're doing. So I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Mostly, thank you. Yes.
All right, well, thanks for the good discussion, everyone. And again, if we'll definitely entertain other questions, and there is time for public comment here after a couple items. You can email or call with questions too. Again, just on that report, so that's the program report. It's all the data about what the program did, like how many inspections, how many facilities of each species and size, enforcement activities, et cetera, around the state. That's online. You're welcome to take a look at it. If you got any questions, you reach out to Christy or I. With that, we do that every year, right? And we share it with EPA and with our partners at DEQ. Any other comments on the report?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, no.
All right, so if we move on to the 235 item, right? So our program does collaborate with other agency partners, right? And our original partner in this program was DEQ. Actually, DEQ ran this program before the partnership got created. And for about the last 30 plus years, right, ODA and DEQ have operated it together. So I wanted to introduce Mike Hyatt. Mike is the permit manager, the MPDS and WPCF permit manager for the Eastern region out of the Pelton office. And he and I are going to tag team just a conversation to bring you up to date about what some of this collaboration looks like contemporaneously. So Mike, I'll turn it over to you.
Happy to be here, everybody. Mike Hyatt, I'm the Eastern Region Water Quality Permitting Manager for DEQ. And so Wim and I have been talking a little bit recently, and I took over in this position August 1st, so about a learning curve for me to come up to speed on what all is going on in terms of the different permits and different types of permits in Eastern Region and what those mean. And so, as many of you probably know in the news, we have a large industrial operation in Port of Morrow, Boardman County, or Morrow and Umatilla County, and by the city of Boardman. Lots going on out there in terms of just the public spotlight and how those facilities out there are managed or permitted environmentally. And so DEQ has made some significant changes in the way we look at those facilities and the way that we work with those facilities and how we permit them, mainly in just kind of looking at agronomic rates and how much they apply and the seasons when they apply, like no winter application because nothing really grows in the winter. So just really disposing of wastewater at that point, and it's doing nothing for the environment except degrading groundwater. And then tracking soil moisture and monitoring that soil moisture throughout the growing season, just to make sure that we're not exceeding any nitrate concentration from the soil profile once we move down through the first, second, third, fourth, and fifth foot. So those are some of the ways that we coordinate. I guess we're going to coordinate on our permitting process moving forward. Just making sure that we have some of those protections in place. And it's mainly just protecting for groundwater, and especially in areas like, the lower Umatilla groundwater management area where we have serious nitrate issues out there. And so we're working hard within our program to make sure that we're consistent with our approach in the groundwater management areas. There's 3 of them in the state, the Willamette, Malheur, and Lower Umatilla Basin. So just making sure that we're consistent on our approach and how we address those concerns in those basins in those areas.
Yeah, thanks for that, Mike. Yeah, I'll just echo those comments. All right, and be a little more specific, right? So a CAFO permit for a facility that's going to land apply, the permit addresses in depth, right? And the nutrient management plan addresses in depth how they're going to calculate how much material they're going to put on the ground per acre, when they're going to put it there, right? And how far they're going to keep it away from surface waters, right? Wells, groundwater, right? If groundwater is really shallow, what activities are you going to undertake to make sure there's not discharge to groundwater? And other than the medium possibly being a little different, like processed wastewater from a food processor, even though the sweet corn and the potatoes and the carrots had an ag origin, right? They went through a processor, they became an industrial waste. But it's really a lot the same as an agricultural waste, right? We want to make sure that both of our agencies and all of our permits, right, calculate those activities in the exact same way. So that one permit, he can't say, hey, wait, DEQ lets me do this, right? Or ODA lets me do this. And because the activities are similar, we want to make sure that we're on the same page with that. So we're as both of our agencies, right, permits, right, we're looking over each other's shoulder to make sure that we match up well there. And then putting all of our collective heads together to figure out, well, how monitoring surface water discharges is pretty simple because it's all visible, right? You can see when it runs over the surface of the land and ends up into a surface water body for the most part. And if it's got any kind of solids in it, it leaves a trail that you can see for a lot of days. So it's not something that's easy to hide. Groundwater is a whole different story, right? Because it's completely invisible and you cannot see the method. You can't see how fast it's moving. You can't see what's moving. You can't see where it's going and what the preferential flow is. And so there is a ton of concern, right, about how groundwater is. And in these groundwater management areas, right, we know there's nitrate levels that are too high in some of the monitoring wells. And we've got to figure out how these systems operate so that we can move the knobs to control the management activities to get groundwater to the right levels. So historically, we've done groundwater monitoring wells, right, at 130 feet deep, 200 feet deep, right? Well, if nitrate makes it that deep, we've all failed. Right, the producer failed, the permit failed, everything failed, and water is polluted, and that's not helpful. But we're trying to talk to a single operator, right? Regardless of size, we're trying to talk to that operator about, hey, make sure you don't do something that's going to cause that to happen. And so now we're doing monitoring in the intervening strata of soil to figure out what's going on. So in the groundwater monitoring, one of the examples is we require soil moisture monitoring from 0 to 12 inches. Like 12 to 24 and 48 to 36. And we also require soil samples from those depths. And even though plant roots are most likely not going to go to 48 to 60 inch depths, other than maybe long-term alfalfa, if we catch it in those upper depths, we could probably still manage it and possibly reclaim it, right, and not keep it from becoming a pollutant. And if we let it go too deep, right, then we lost the battle. And so our agencies are putting our heads together to look at technology and look at monitoring systems and require the same types of monitoring systems, whether it be industrial applications or agricultural, so that our data sets match, right? Sharing the data is another really big part of this collaboration. DEQ has permits that require monitoring wells that report to DEQ, and ODA has permits that have monitoring wells that report to us. And we're gonna spatially, right, display that data on a map so that now we have a regional look at the activity that's under control of these permits, and then hopefully that'll give us more data points to make a call on, right? And Oregon's, I think has a really good system in that we're not so concerned about how people get to no discharge, right? A lot of states say you have to do this, period. That's the only option. And if you don't do that, right, you can't operate here. And we don't say it that way. We say it's performance based. If your data shows you're not discharging, good job. Your system is working awesome. And so having those kinds of conversations and making sure that DEQ gets out on our facilities and that we look at hydraulic loading and nutrient loading and timing and placement I think that will help us be successful, right, in our regulatory requirement, right, for those folks. And so, yeah, stay tuned. There'll be continued work there. And I think a lot of the activity, you know, will appear to be internal. We'll try to figure out a way to maybe make some of that data spatially visible, right?
Mhm.
So if we develop mapping with all the monitoring, you know, well locations and data and make it public facing, right? I think that will be where you'll start seeing, you know, the result of that collaboration. So.
So, excuse me, that's only on the east side then? Or are you gonna do ponds and on west side here in the valley as well?
I'd say the, you know, the start is Lower Umatilla just because of the focus there. But the goal is statewide, right? It may look different in different areas.
Right.
Yeah, and I wanted to, kind of mention just like the consistency, in terms of the permits would be like the consistency and the requirements and what we require, but each permit's going to be different, tailored to the specific operation and what happens there. But definitely we have some pretty serious groundwater issues in, mainly Umatilla and Morrow counties and the La Palma space, but there are other locations throughout the state that have groundwater management areas as well. But us having a consistent approach on our permitting just statewide helps the programs work more consistently amongst each other, and being able to share our data and having that open line of communication really helps as well. And it also helps in situations where we're being thrusted into the public and into the media and into the spotlight, to where we're having to defend the people that are permitted and what they're doing, what their operations are, so that EPA is not moving its way into the neighborhood and forcing the producers to do things that are outside of our control.
I guess the last piece I'd say on this is that the collaboration, right, isn't just limited to ODA and DEQ, although that's kind of the original one and the continuing one. Definitely in the CAFO world, right, the Department of Water Resources, right, ODA can only regulate what we have authority to. We don't have authority to regulate air quality, right? DEQ does, but ODA doesn't. We don't have authority to regulate water quantity, right? So is there enough water, or is there a water right for this activity? That's WRD purview. And so, drought has been in the news and climate change is in the news pretty regularly and continually. Water supply and water quantity is becoming a big part of the conversation. And we have to work with these other agencies that have authority to regulate that and have an existing regulatory system to bring that into the loop. So going forward, I will probably, be bringing folks from Water Resources and other partners, right, so that you can kind of see the partnership, right, and talk about whatever we're working with them, right. We're not working with air quality with WRD because they don't have authority to regulate it. DEQ does, right, and I'm sure in the future we'll be working with them on that side. Questions on collaboration activities? Sure.
Thank you so much for laying that out. It's really helpful. I was just wondering, in this interagency collaboration, do you foresee there being a time when ODA would potentially deny a new permit based on the findings from DEQ or OWRD? And are those things being taken into account, not only in monitoring the system as a whole, but in new permit applications and approvals?
So I say, given conversations over the last 12 months, that could be a possibility, right? And using water quantity as an example, if a proposed facility, it's going to essentially stick a new straw into an aquifer where WRD says there's not enough water there already, that could be something that would lead us to say, that activity couldn't support that permit there, right? I know historically we have denied permits because of water quantity issues, right? The water right was not active, right, or it was not correct, and it wouldn't support the irrigation that a proposed facility wanted to do, right? They said in their plan, they said we want to irrigate 500 acres, right, and we've got these 2 water rights. And Water Resources said, yeah, one of their water rights is fine, but the other one is not. It never got perfected. It doesn't exist. So we told them they had to modify their plan and cut back their acres. They said, we can't function if we do that. And we denied the permit because they couldn't provide the crop system that were going to use the nutrients on the manure side they were going to generate. It wouldn't balance. All right. Well, I know people would like to make public comment, and we'll move to that point now. Thank you, Mike, for helping with that. Do we have an idea about how many folks want to make comment?
We put on the list. There was a list.
Okay.
There's 6 on my list.
Okay, so we have 9 in total.
Okay.
So can we do 2 minutes each? All right, and since we started with the room first, could we go to the online first and let them go first? So Amanda, if you just want to call a name, and then we'll need to figure out a way to time. Christy, can you start that out on your phone? And then we are recording, right? So that's how we're going to take these public comments is on the record there.
So is April Beardsley there?
She said she was on the phone and didn't have her muted. Is there a way for you to unmute her on your end?
Yeah.
Can you maybe let the next person testify while you're working to
Okay.
unmute her?
Ari, are you ready to comment?
Yes, I am. Good afternoon again, everyone. I didn't introduce myself earlier. Perhaps I should have done that, but my name is Ari Bargill. I'm an attorney with an organization called the Institute for Justice. We're a national nonprofit public interest law firm that defends constitutional rights, including property rights in the courts of law and public opinion. In the past, this has included litigation on behalf of small farmers in Oregon. The department's proposed action caught my attention for several reasons. First, the department's proposed definition of confined for purposes of establishing a confined animal feeding operation, in my view, is incorrect. And I know that you had lawyers advise you on this point, but it seems to strike me as being inconsistent with the plain understanding of those terms. Many small-scale farmers, particularly those who milk small numbers of goats or cows, do so manually in small, unenclosed parlors or shelters built for the specific purpose of briefly milking, but not feeding, confining, or housing their animals. And so in this way, my view is that the department's interpretation is both atextual and in tension with analogous state and federal laws that provide for various periods of time of confinement without needing a CAFO permit. But second, and most importantly, given some of the discussion that we've had here today, which solidifies this concern, the department's proposed definition is openly protectionist. The department's avowed goal is to address what I view as an incorrect belief that unpermitted raw milk and herd share dairies enjoy an unfair competitive advantage of not having the permit. But small farms don't have an unfair competitive advantage over operations that are exponentially larger and more profitable. And even if they did, imposing on them an ill-suited regulatory framework is not an appropriate way to address that supposed imbalance. Finally, the department has indicated both in writing and in word, again here today, that it's only interested in pursuing this definition of CAFO as it applies to small dairies that do not sell their milk off-site. I don't understand how the environmental protection goals that are supposedly animating this regulation are served by requiring CAFO permits only for farmers, dairy farmers with 2 cows, but not, for example, 200 horses, and whose environmental impacts are significantly lower than a larger operation with no off-site sales. There are other constitutional infirmities that I see with this regulation, but the fact that its definitions are unmoored from any common understanding of the terms, and this is done with designs on specifically protecting other larger actors. I thank you. That was all. That's constitutionally problematic in my view. Thank you.
Thanks. You should get April.
I don't seem to be able to unmute her. The only option it gives me is to disable her mic.
Can you call the next person and maybe we can have April call Christie's phone? You have your work phone, Christie?
So the rest of the people are here in person on my list.
Okay. Go ahead and call one and then.
Okay, Christine Anderson.
Thank you for your time and opportunity to speak today. My name is Christine Anderson. I run a small herd share operation in McMinnville. I wanted to voice my concerns about the new initiative on the part of ODA and this committee to pivot and now require small producers like myself to carry a CAFO permit. I've been operating at my current property for 13 years, and we've worked hard over that time to be good stewards to the land and to our common water resource. Seems that the intention here is to repurpose the concept of confinement. Because of our small number of animals and ratio to our property size, we're able to maintain an intensive rotational grazing system, inclusive of the winter. So far this winter, my cows have spent a total of only 6 days inside our barn in true confinement. This is well below the federal and state threshold. It is called a confined animal feeding operation after all. This action redefines confinement to mean that the animals are being confined during the milking process, which takes between 5 to 7 minutes a day. My cows neither eat nor produce manure in the parlor during milking and when they are returned, and then they are returned to their pasture afterwards. To say that a cow is in confinement when they spend 23 hours and 55 minutes per day out on pasture and only 5 minutes in barn is a gross misrepresentation. On my farm, currently the number of animals I manage is a mere 2% of the smallest CAFO permit that ODA issues. It's unrealistic for small 2-cow operations to maintain a comprehensive record keeping and reporting requirements, as well as infrastructure requirements that are meant to mitigate the environmental impact of having many animals in confined and concentrated housing. In a presentation given by the director last month, he noted that it was possible that exemptions would be given for someone with 1 or 2 cows so long as the milk produced does not leave the farm premises. If the purpose of the CAFO program is to protect the environment, I fail to understand how the environmental impact changes when the farmer sells the milk. It's no secret that the dairy industry and ODA are fans of raw milk, and this seems like a convenient barrier to construct for the restricted viability of running a raw milk operation. Sadly, I do know of a few producers who were in fear of coming to talk to you today for fear of backlash. In conclusion, this program unfairly targets regulation at an incredibly small producer specifically because they're producing raw milk, and I urge you to reconsider wasting the valuable agency resources, which we all know are limited, pursuing a program that will not only bring about that will not bring any appreciable environmental benefit to the people of Oregon. Thank you.
We do have one person, Amy Van Son, that would like to comment online. Go ahead, Amy.
Thanks. Hi. I just wanted to ask a question of WIM. What timeline is there, if any, that you can share on the proposed general NPDES permit? I know that, the proposed one came out a long time ago and there was comment period. And so just curious if there's any updates, and maybe I missed them. And if so, I apologize, on what the agency is thinking in that.
So Amy, can I respond to that? Can I get back to you after the meeting, right? Which I'll do.
Absolutely.
I'll do that. Thanks.
Okay, was April able to call your phone?
Well, I don't know why she would call. I guess I could put it on speaker. Is that what?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll go on to Alice Morrison.
Hello. Hi, everyone. My name is Alice Morrison. Thanks for the opportunity to speak today. I'm the co-executive director of Friends of Family Farmers, a statewide nonprofit organization that represents over 1,600 small and highly diversified farmers, including some of the folks you've heard from today. I am deeply concerned about the raw milk outreach and education program described in today's agenda. As others have stated, there is no difference in the environmental impact of a 2-cow dairy, whether they sell their milk or not. And I would really rather see this outreach and education requirement be targeted at since this is a water quality permit, targeted at the environmental impact of a farm, not whether or not they are selling their milk off premises. I think that is not a fair way to determine who has to apply for these permits and who doesn't. I would also take issue with the notion that these raw milk farms are in competition with grade A dairies. Raw milk is not legal for retail sale in Oregon. It is a fundamentally different market. You have to market your product directly to the consumer. You have to have people come to your farm or have a herd share agreement where you're putting the milk into the hands of the end consumer. You're not able to take advantage of any of the other infrastructure for industry and selling your milk. And in that case, your margins are much smaller because you're doing so much more labor to get that milk into someone's hands. So I don't see the point in making a distinction between a dairy that is 3 cows who consumes all of their milk on site, giving it to livestock or to their family, and a dairy that is 3 cows with 2 milking, using the license exemption for raw milk. And I also want to reiterate that you all know my organization. You've heard from us many, many times. And we really appreciate the accountability for the environmental impact of all farms, but we want to make sure this is based on environmental impact and not market factors.
Thanks.
Okay, Sarah King.
Hi. My name is Sarah King. I am an operate Godspeed Hollow. Godspeed Hollow is just shy of 11 acres. We use biodynamic and regenerative practices for our program. I have 2 cows, so equaling 1% of the stocking rate for a CAFO permit. That provided milk for my family and for our local community as part of a herd share program for the last 5 years. My ladies are in the pasture 365 days a year with access to protection and comfort under a shed during the winter months. I rely on our animals bedding, which is composted on site and spread on our pastures and vineyard to build soil and retain water because we don't have water rights to irrigate. Last spring, I added an additional 40 tons of compost to the pastures from a neighboring horse farm that was overwhelmed by their manure piles. My management practices have allowed me to increase the number of rotational grazing days each year. My pastures are carefully placed to keep distance from rainwater collection and runoff points, and not only to protect the waterways and water quality, but to ensure the safety of my animals. My cleaning and sanitation practices use less than 7 gallons of water daily and use the same dairy products as our dairy industry, which neutralize itself during use and is discharged on my own personal lawn, in no way being dispersed into the waters of the state. I've applied for manure and shed programs through the NRCS and was denied because of the size and scale of my program. I find the program's documentation confusing and interchangeably uses the terms confined feeding and holding and concentrated feeding. According to EPA's inspection manual for the Federal Pollution Discharge Program, a dairy confinement area actually only delineates the housing area of dairy cows, not the milking parlor or the stanchion. Given that distinction and classification, at no time are my cows being confined. I'm still unclear as to what the difference is between an operation that is selling milk versus not selling milk. Even if the milk is being consumed on site, the manure and wastewater still happen and have to be managed. I've often milked multiple cows for the purpose of feeding pigs, chickens, and my calves. Dry cows and lactating cows both produce manure. Either way, I have to wash the equipment I use and it produces wastewater that I have to count for carefully. I'm flattered that the larger dairy industry considers me a competitor, but I'm not sure that my 2 cows can keep up. We've mentioned the Washington's process earlier. Alice talked about the scale and size. Thank you.
Thanks.
Brian Schmidt.
Brian was having car issues. He submitted a statement into public. I don't know if you want to read it or if I don't know how you handle that, but.
It's the one I gave you this afternoon.
Yeah. Hi, can you hear me?
Oh, there.
Yeah.
Yeah, hi. I just called in. Sorry about that. I'm still on the side of the road, but I did submit some written testimony. Should I go ahead and read it out loud?
So either way, right, we'll either read it in for you or you could read it. Go ahead.
Okay. So I wanted to say I grew up on a commercial turkey farm, and I'm so in a wheat farm, and I now work a full-time job and teach high school. I'm a pretty busy guy. I got 3 hazelnut orchards, and then I have this 2 cow thing I milk on the side, and I do intensive grazing where I have little paddock set up. This is by no means a moneymaker thing for me. I use this excess milk to pay for the hay, and it does not cover all the hay. Like I said, this is not a moneymaker thing for me. I started doing this because I wanted the milk for myself, and also it worked out given my farming background and resources to be able to have a place to have a cow in a barn to milk. Okay, and also the vitamin D emulsifiers that are added to all the store-bought milk, you can't find it without it. So that's why I drink my own milk. This has nothing to do with it being raw. I want to say it has come to my attention, and the reason I'm calling in today is because the Friends of Family Farmers have sponsored a bill, SB 85. I know that has nothing to do with this, but but it kind of does in a roundabout way. I'm a longtime member of Farm Bureau, and this has given me, you know, an internal look into the farming world, right? In different groups in the farming world, not just Farm Bureau. One of those groups is the Oregon Dairy Association, as I think some people there might have mentioned already. The Oregon Dairy Association, it looks like, is retaliating against Friends of Family Farmers for sponsoring the bill SB 85. That's my interpretation. And looks like I am being punished for that. I don't know if that's the case, but it looks like it. Is this what our government is for? I'm personally acquainted with Dan Luthold and Mrs. Carol Luthold of Luthold Dairy, who have been very kind to me during the past decade. I've done quite a bit of traveling with Farm Bureau, whether it be tours here in the state of Oregon or tours of farms in other places in the country, such as Pennsylvania, Tennessee, and Phoenix. And I wanted to share that these people are very kind, but I want you to know that they're the reason why Farm Bureau hasn't pushed back against this. This is something that's new. It's something that exceeds the federal CAFO regulations. And for that reason, it is in the policy handbook of Farm Bureau to fight it. But why aren't they? They aren't because the Lutholds are board members. So I think one of your panel
Can
members.
we wrap it? Can we wrap it up, please? Your 2 minutes is up. Thank you.
Oh, I have 2 minutes. I'm sorry. So I asked the ODA must drop this immediately, please, and allow any changes to the CAFO requirements to please be made through the legislative channels, not on the whims of revenge. Because it feels to me like ODA is stuck in the middle here, and their ODA is being used to get revenge against Friends of Family Farmers. I'm not affiliated with Friends of Family Farmers, so I feel that I'm being unjustly, suffering here. I want to thank you all so much for making this opportunity available to us to speak to you today. Thank you.
Thanks.
That was it.
That was it. Okay. So
thank you very much.
Did the one woman get through that was
I
trying?
never called my
phone.
All right. Well, can we? You can have her submit right.
Paper, right? So.
Yeah, we got it, Brian. We got the paper. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Last call for public comment. All right. Not hearing any. Moving to that 310 item, and thank you all for helping us stay on schedule. I appreciate that. For partner agency updates, and if you don't mind, I'm going to call on Nick Peak with EPA first. I think he has some updates for us. Nick, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can. And I'm going to leave my camera off. I've got some bandwidth issues today, so I'll just leave the camera off for now. First thing I just wanted to touch on is the subject of waters.
Could you introduce yourself first, Nick?
Oh, I'm sorry. Hi, I'm Nick Peak. I'm with EPA Region 10. I'm the Regional Agriculture Advisor for the region, and I'm stationed over here in Boise, Idaho. Sorry about that. Just wanted to touch on the Waters of the United States final rule. In late December 30th to be exact, EPA and the Army Corps of Engineers announced a final rule to codify the definition of waters of the United States founded on the pre-2015 definition. And this was updated to reflect Supreme Court decisions, recent science, and technical expertise that the agencies have at their disposal. Well, this is never without litigation. And in mid-March, March 19th, the U.S. District Court of the Southern District of Texas granted a motion enjoining a preliminary enjoining in Texas and Idaho the 2023 final rule. So I'm reading talking points here, but what I'd like to just point out is that as of March 19th, the rule has been stayed in Texas and Idaho and is effective in other in all the other states in the United States. Now, that being said, yesterday, the district court in the Court of North Dakota granted an order for an additional 24 states request for a preliminary injunction. So now there's an additional 24 states in addition to Idaho and Texas where the most recent clean or waters of the U.S. rule has been stayed. And so we're back to where we were before, where some states the new rule is effective or in effect, and then in some states it's back to business as usual before the water or before this most recent rule was proposed. Looking at the order yesterday, it looks like there's that Oregon is not one of those states, so Oregon would be under the new rule, whereas Idaho would be under the old regime or old rule. And so it's just I just wanted to bring this up because it's always confusing, but there will be more information coming out from EPA or the Corps here in the future, kind of explaining the next steps given the two injunctions. Let's see. The next thing I just want to touch on is some updates regarding, or potential updates regarding CAFO effluent limitation guidelines. So the ELGs for short is what is in CAFO permits, NPDES permits. So the state of Oregon and their permit has effluent limitation guidelines for CAFOs. In January 20th, EPA released what's called an effluent limitation guidelines program Plan 15, or Plan 15 for short, which describes EPA's annual review of the effluent limitation and guidelines, or identifies. Was there a question? Okay, sorry about that. I thought I heard some.
Oh, good.
Okay, so that this Plan 15 is it's a study is the short way to put it. And so EPA has not reviewed the ELGs for the CAFO sector for quite some time. I think probably 10 or 11 years. That might be incorrect on that, but it's been a while. Typically, the agency does this for ELGs every 5 years. And so the agency has determined that the data about discharges of pollutants from CAFOs to surface waters is sparse. And that's because of some states where there's lack of permit coverage. There's a variety of issues or a variety of reasons. So the agency has decided to gather additional information and to conduct a detailed study to basically determine whether to undertake a rulemaking to revise those ELGs. Some of the specific information that the agency intends to gather is, and I'm just going to read these so I get them right here, is whether discharges from the production area comply with the current ELGs, the extent to which manure, litter, and processed wastewater flows off land application areas, new technologies and practices for reducing discharges from the CAFOs to waters of the U.S., and whether these technologies may be economically achievable. And so the pace of this is, we're at the federal government, so it's never quick, but the comment on the pace of this is that it's going to depend on the agency's fiscal year 2023 appropriations and operating plan, basically our budget. So I can send WIM a link if folks are interested in looking at this, but just wanted to bring that up and let you know that the agency's taking a look at the ELGs, and it remains to be seen what will happen after the study's done, but that we're taking a look at it. Let's see, the last thing I wanted to bring up was less regulatory in nature. And that's just to put a plug in for our Columbia River Basin Restoration Program. This program is an actual Clean Water Act section. It's called Clean Water Act Section 123, and it's basically a catalyst for reducing toxins in the Columbia River Basin. So it's a big basin, obviously. It's a big watershed. It covers lots of area, all the way over into Wyoming, down to Nevada, and up into Canada. And so the agency has already done this. We've already published or released some grants to entities to help reduce toxics in the basin. And there's going to be some more grants coming out in the near future. And the entities that are eligible for these types of grants it's a wide list. It's state, local, and tribal governments, soil and water conservation districts, universities, nonprofits. Also includes tribes and state agencies and other organizations that can administer their own grant programs. And what the agency is looking for, or what the kind of projects we're looking to fund or that are eligible, and I'll just kind of stick to the ag related ones here, are projects that reduce ag and stormwater runoff to reduce toxics. And this includes entities currently engaged in the Clean Water Act 319 program. So, folks that are interested in agricultural grants are encouraged just to apply. And this also includes projects that promote any type of citizen, industry, or local engagement or education to increase the implementation of pollution prevention practices to reduce toxics. So it's pretty wide and pretty encompassing who's eligible and what can be done. I think we've awarded 22 grants already. I might be off on that number by 2, but it's a pretty big program. The other thing I just want to mention about it is the bipartisan infrastructure law, or bill is what we call it. There's a lot of money there, $79 million. And so during the remainder of 2023, there's going to be several more RFAs or requests for applications to dole out some grant money coming in. And these are going to be big grants, and they're intended to go out to entities or organizations with basically the capacity to administer their own grant programs. So it would be about 4 to 5 years in terms of the length of the grant. And so we're talking about millions of bucks going out to a single agency or entity, which would then use that funding to fund smaller grants that they would basically administer. And so it's a big deal. It's it's not often we get a new act or a new section of the Clean Water Act. The bill funding has been huge. There's lots of money, so much money that some folks don't know what to do with it. And it's just something that's a really cool thing that the agency is doing. So if folks are interested in that, I'd be happy to pass on more information or put you in contact with the main person who's administering this program for EPA. And I'll just stop there, Wim.
All right, thanks, Nick. Any questions about EPA updates?
The ELG, was that the ELG, what was that?
Effluent limit guideline.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Wasn't sure.
All right, thank you, Nick. Anybody else on the phone or in the room with updates? On the meeting, I'm sorry, not phone, on the Teams meeting with updates? All right, not hearing that. Industry updates, anybody with the industry update? Not seeing any of the room on the meeting, industry updates? All right. So the other thing we'll attempt to do, right, as part of the record for this is to make sure that we can preserve everything in the chat and figure out a way to get that into the record as well.
Okay.
And with that, unless anybody else has questions, comments, et cetera, I would throw out that if folks have ideas for agenda items for the next, so we meet in July and October. And currently the meetings are set up to those 3 times a year. If folks have ideas or presentations you'd like to see, or folks you'd like to have come speak on anything CAFO related, right, in the July or October meeting, let me know. And we'll see if we can set up a presentation to do that. All right, well, thanks all for participating and thanks for your patience on the tech issues, et cetera. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Take care.